Well, good morning or good afternoon to everyone. I'm going to let you all get logged in, and as you're getting logged in, we're going to go through some housekeeping information, and then I'm also posting the slide deck in your webinar chat, and it's on a URL, so you can go there and pick up the slide deck if you would like to follow up with the information. And so it looks like you're all getting logged in here. And I want to welcome you to the Why Be a Non-Delegated Correspondent Lender. And I'm going to start the webinar out and going through some information as far as how you can ask questions. You can control your speakers if you want to listen on your computer, or you can dial in if you'd like to do that. I have the instructions up there, so if you are not dialed in yet, hopefully you can see our screen and be able to put your information in there. Information's in the toolbar as far as where to dial in. If you do have any questions throughout our session today, you can type those in the question panel. And so you just click on the Q&A, type in your questions there. There's also a chat box. So if you'd like to type in your questions either in the Q&A section or in the chat box, we can see your questions there and be able to address those as they come in. And then we also have a Q&A that we'll be doing at the end of the session today. And so you can control your speakers. That is on your computer if you're dialing in. It's on your phone, but this is how you do it on your computer. So a little bit of a new system we're using here. Zoom, if you've been on a webinar in the last few months, we've been using this, and it allows us to be able to have more people attend the webinars, which is great. We've had a lot of you register for our webinar today, and our goal today is to be able to provide you with information on becoming a non-delegated lender and the benefits of that. So before I get into introductions, I want to make sure that you all can hear me, and I'm not having a conversation with myself and Garrett here. So if you can type in, and this also will allow us to practice using the Q&A or the chat box, but type in either the chat box or the Q&A section. I don't really care where it is, but just type in what part of the country you're calling in from. That way I know that you can hear me, and also that you know how to type in your questions there. So very good. I see Janine, you are from Massachusetts. I'm hoping your fall is good. I don't know if we have anyone calling in from our southeastern states in Florida. We're wishing you all the very best there. Scott, welcome from Mississippi. So that's good. You all can keep doing that. If you'd like to test that out, that's fine, but it allows me to know that you all can hear me, so that's very important. So my name is Ginger Bell. I'm an education specialist with Go2Training. I'm also a consultant with Finance of America, and I help them to put together their training programs, their Finance of America University, and then also webinars like this. Some of you may have been on a webinar with me before, been doing these for quite a while, and Garrett and I have had the opportunity to do webinars together in the past as well. And so Garrett, we want to welcome you back. Garrett is the National NDC Sales Manager for Finance of America, and Garrett has over 32 years of mortgage industry experience, which means he started when he was 12, like all of us, right, Garrett?
Yep, that's it.
Yeah, Garrett has been around the NDC platform for quite a while, and his previous experience includes over 17 years as a regional manager at Flagstar Bank, where he helped to introduce and launch the non-delegated correspondent business channel. His passion, and I tell you what, guys, it truly, truly is his passion, is helping mortgage professionals evolve into correspondent lenders while increasing their profitability and efficiency. And if you've ever had an opportunity to talk to Garrett about how to do that, he is very passionate and extremely knowledgeable. So Garrett, I'm so excited to be able to work with you on this webinar and to be able to share the information that we're talking about today. So as we go along, our objective today is to talk about what it means to be a non-delegated correspondent. And this is actually the very first in our webinar we're doing in a series of becoming a non-delegated correspondent. We're going to talk about why this is important now, cover the difference between being a broker and a non-delegated lender, and then review the advantages and benefits of being a non-delegate correspondent. And then we have some FAQs that we're going to go through at the end of some questions that you may not be thinking of. Now, if you're joining us, I do want to let you know that we do have the slide deck that is available. It is in your chat box, and I'm going to put it up there again. If you're joining us late, click on the link and you can access that information there. So, Garrett, we're going to start out with what it means to be a non-delegate correspondent. So, typically, what type of person are we talking about?
You know, the typical transition we see is the professional mortgage broker that's ready to take his business to the next level. You know, they're, as this slide indicates, they're typically entrepreneurial, organized, like to take a leadership position. They're aware of the risk in the marketplace, but not necessarily adverse when it makes sense, and they're mitigated. And they have the ability to put together a program to market and brand themselves, you know, kind of while wearing multiple hats in the industry. It's the next transition above being a mortgage broker, and I think offers tremendous benefits to someone that is in a position to rapidly grow their business.
So let's talk about what some of those benefits are.
You know, when I talk to non-delegated correspondents that have made the conversion, they will universally share that they like having more control of the process. Specifically, the ability to prepare the loan estimate in their name and disclose it directly to the borrower with controls of the fees. They also like the fact that as a non-delegated correspondent, as long as they have AIR policy and procedures, they can directly order an appraisal from the AMC of their choice. Traditionally, non-delegated correspondent has a better pricing model, but I would say that most people that step into it don't do it because they think they're going to make money on a loan-by-loan basis. It's a accumulation of the benefits, like not having a compensation plan with the lender and additional flexibility to bring more loans to the table, and the ability to outsource and mitigate risk through use of third parties. You know, at FAM, we specialize in providing tremendous support and training to our non-delegated customers. And obviously, by us taking on the underwriting portion, we've removed the credit risk from the traditional role. So it's kind of the best of all worlds, Ginger. They have the ability to maintain their independence as an independent originator like they do today as a mortgage broker, but have the flexibility of controlling the loan estimate, the closing disclosure, not having a comp plan with the lender, and the ability to earn service release premiums paid after the closing takes place at loan purchase.
That makes sense. Now, obviously, the non-delegated correspondent channel has been around for a while, and it has gone through evolving and changing, being called a couple different names. But what kind of landscape are we in right now for this particular business model?
You know, it's really interesting. There was a lot of scrutiny when the CFPB put out their guidance, and a lot of people were very concerned as to the viability and longevity of the program. And what we have seen is that as long as our customers have set up correctly, are using an independent third-party warehouse facility, and making use of either closing the loans themselves or using a third party to do so, they've met the litmus test of what the CFPB is looking for. But you know, from a marketing perspective, I'm seeing more and more companies branding themselves as quote-unquote direct lenders, because a non-delegated correspondent, whether they have a $75,000 net worth or a $2 million net worth, the methodology of how the loan closes is the same. They're using their own funds in conjunction with the warehouse facility. So the way the loan is treated is no different than somebody that has a $10 million worth. So they're able to enjoy the same advantages of the largest lenders in the marketplace to compete. And that includes the ability to recruit and attract the best loan officer talent. So there's just tremendous flexibility for someone that's willing to take the next step in the evolutionary process of mortgage banking.
Which is really the environment we're in. And I know we've talked about some of the types of individuals that we're seeing step into being a non-delegate correspondent. And it's not just brokers. We're actually seeing some individuals who are perhaps branch managers for different companies that are saying, hey, we have a clear understanding of the regulations and the risks, and it's not quite as scary as we thought it was going to be, or you know, it's kind of leveled out a little bit. So is that what you're seeing truly in the marketplace today?
Without question. You know, anybody that's been able to originate a loan in their own name and take advantage of the disclosure process and the control of the loan estimate and the closing disclosure, as well as the pricing flexibility afforded to them as a correspondent lender, whether they're doing that in a retail branch environment, or even some larger folks that maybe had stepped up into that delegated role and hired underwriters and have made the strategic decision that it doesn't make sense for them to take on credit risk anymore. And they're more comfortable. They still want the ability to market, to brand themselves as a correspondent lender, to control the disclosure and the appraisal piece, but they want to outsource the underwriting. And this model is becoming more and more attractive to a wider array of customers each and every day, Ginger.
So there are some risks involved, obviously, for everything we do in our business, whether you are a loan originator, whether you're a broker, whether you're a non-delegated, whether you're a banker. So what are some of the risks in being a non-delegate?
Traditionally, the number one risk that people have probably the most fear about is, am I going to be subject to a repurchase? And, you know, I would address that if properly set up and the risks are mitigated. And obviously the first way to mitigate that risk is have the investor underwrite the loan, because then you're not responsible for the credit decision risk. So, you know, I would share that if a non-delegated correspondent sets up correctly and they're willing to outsource, at least initially, closing funding and post-closing to a third party, then they've got the same risk they do as a broker, which is misrepresentation. And that never goes away, right? Whether it be the borrower's made misrepresentation or someone at the company made misrepresentation, that's probably the number one risk that we see today. You've listed cash flow up there. You know, cash flow changes. As a table-funded wholesale customer, obviously compensation takes place at the closing table. And as a non-delegated correspondent, compensation takes place at loan purchase. So it really just moves, you know, typically 5 to 12 business days from closing until they actually get paid. Makes
sense. So the advantages, you know, you talked about, but what does the NDC control?
The first step in the control is they control the loan estimate. Because they're disclosing as a lender, a non-delegated correspondent has the flexibility to disclose as much or as little as they choose to be competitive in a transaction. So as an example, a non-delegated correspondent, if they choose to, can absorb all the lender fees and our fees in the transaction, and thus disclosing a very streamlined cost directly to the borrower. Additionally, they control the appraisal part, and that's probably one of the biggest benefits universally I see people taking advantage of in the process. Again, as long as they have AIR policies and procedures, Finance of America will allow them to use any AIR compliant AMC of their choice. They're not stuck with a panel of finite AMCs that are in our list as an example. So if they have a regional or a local AMC that's AIR compliant and they have a relationship and feel they can get a better service level, they can take advantage of that. And tied directly to the loan estimate, of course, is the closing disclosure. Again, the non-delegated correspondent is responsible for ordering or preparing his closing disclosure, and he or she has the ability, if they so choose, to absorb the same fees we talked about on the loan estimate to provide less cost directly to the borrower at the closing table. And of course, you know, they're able to, when that loan is purchased, they're able to use above par pricing or service release premium to absorb those costs. They do business today just like they do as a table funded wholesale. They're still going to take the application, process the loan, submit that and deliver it to underwriting, get it clear to close, and then have the ability to order their CD directly, and then obviously the funds from their warehouse facility to consummate the transaction at the closing table.
So really it gives them a lot more control over the entire timing of the transaction.
You know, I've heard it said that a lot of non-delegated correspondents say, hey, it's sort of like going back to yesteryear, right? Back in the good old days before we had a lot of this regulation, and it puts them back in the driver's seat. You know, it's interesting. I've in my experience, with rare exceptions, I've not had a non-delegated correspondent come back and say, you know what, I want to move back to being a pure wholesale broker. Once they've made the transition and they're able to enjoy these controls and the ability to expand their business, recruit more loan officers, brand themselves as a lender, it's very difficult for them to take a step backwards into the pure broker arena.
Well, and really it's a combination of both, to where they have that independence and advantage of being a broker, but also the control that goes along with being a correspondent.
And absolutely. At Finance of America, one of the things that we do that's kind of unique is we allow our customers to be both, right? They get approved as a broker. It's an addendum to the agreement to be a non-delegated correspondent. But if they're more comfortable table funding a loan, we will absolutely allow them to do that. Some lenders, it's all or none. Either you're NDC or you're broker. Here you have the flexibility to enjoy both business channels.
Right. So let's look at that and talk about what types of loan programs they can do as an NDC.
Well, obviously they have the full suite of conventional loans. So they can do any of the agency Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac loans. They are allowed to close USDA loans in their own name, so they can close USDA loans as a non-delegated correspondent, and the same for VA loans. Again, VA allows a lender to close that loan in their own name. The restriction is really on FHA. To close FHA loans as a non-delegated correspondent, they do have to have a direct approval with HUD, either in the form of a DE or direct endorsement or a Title II approval that allows them to close that loan in their own name.
So let's talk about why this is so important right now. And you know, Garrett, you've been in the industry for a long time. I've been in the industry for a long time. Probably most everyone on the call has been in the industry for a while. And we've seen a lot of changes that have come in transitioning through different business models. So why is this important now for individuals to consider becoming an NDC? And we'll start out with probably one of the most important things. You talked a little bit about it before.
Well, you know, again, it's back to the control module. The NDC lender controls the original loan estimate and thus is able to immediately get the loan estimate and the intent to proceed executed, which allows them to immediately order an appraisal. So from a timing perspective, they have more control in getting that loan to the closing table faster and have the ability to satisfy their third-party referral sources with timely closings and fundings. You know, again, they still originate the loan, they still process the loan, they deliver that loan to Finance of America for underwriting. Most of our non-delegated correspondents are running DO or LP directly in their systems, assigning those findings to us, submitting them with the package, and we kind of pride ourselves on the non-delegated side of offering our basically direct agency, Fannie, Freddie, and Ginnie products, so they have a minimum of overlays. The goal is to create predictability and the ability to replicate loan approvals based on the findings that are run by our partner and the data integrity in terms of validating those findings.
Right.
NDC loans. Go ahead, Ginger, I'm sorry.
No, you're just talking about predictability, and we have one of the bullets up there as far as all NDC loans are net funded. And out of everyone that I have heard talk about net fundings, you do the best as far as explaining that. So can you do that and just tell us how NDC loans are net funded?
Sure. You know, a term that comes up, and I get asked frequently, is what is a haircut? And the best way to describe that is every warehouse facility has a maximum funding percentage that they will allow. Most common in the industry is 99%. So in the example of a $100,000 loan, the maximum that the warehouse will advance is $99,000. At the same time, though, it's going to be the lower of the maximum advance rate or the net funding amount. And so the warehouse facility, when funds are ordered, they're always going to net out funds that are brought to the closing table. So they're going to net out fees, so all fees to the lender. They're going to, because the borrower's bringing that. They're going to net out any interest, and that's the per diem interest that's paid at closing from the date of closing through the end of the month. And they're going to net out any escrows that will be brought by the borrower. So they're going to net interest, escrows, and fees. And in the vast majority of times, when you take the net funding amount, it's always lower than the maximum advance rate. So the non-delegated correspondent doesn't have to bring money to the table to consummate a transaction. Now, because they have netted out the fees, right, there's nothing at the table that to be paid to the non-delegated correspondent. That takes place when the loan is purchased. So in an example of our $100,000 loan, and say that the net funding amount was 2.5 or 97.5, right? When we buy the loan, if it was priced at 102, we would buy it for 102,000. So that's when the customer receives their profit in the loan, including their fees, and they are paid in the transaction. Does that make sense?
Yes, and again, you did a great job explaining that. So let's move on, because you've talked a little bit about compliance and what are the options, because oftentimes when I talk to individuals, they say, you know, I don't want to add a lot of staff in order to do this, you know, and I don't want to take on that portion of the risk. So what do you see as far as compliance and being an NDC?
I'm a huge believer in variable cost outsourced solutions, which is a fancy way of saying I'm a big believer in using third-party fulfillment, especially for someone that's new in the non-delegated correspondent space. So essentially, again, the role they've taken in the origination process has not changed, right? And what a third-party fulfillment provider is able to do is basically that's who would handle, they would make their closing doc orders. So they would basically prepare the CD, contact the settlement agent, true up the fees so they get the final CD prepared. They prepare the closing documents. They actually order a wire on behalf of the non-delegated correspondent. They authorize disbursement. So what they're doing there is checking to make sure that the final signed note, security instrument, and closing disclosure matches the unsigned, and that all the at-closing conditions were met. Then they take the package and upload it to the investor for purchase and follow up on any post-closing stipulations to get the loan bought. So by doing that, again, they're only paying for that service, which can be passed through to the borrower on a loan-by-loan basis, and they don't have to add any full-time employees or take on any additional employment expense to conduct business as a non-delegated correspondent.
All right. Makes sense. So let's get into the difference, the primary differences between being a broker and a non-delegated correspondent, or NDC. So what's the primary difference of a correspondent lender and an NDC? Because oftentimes people ask about that too.
Well, theoretically, the correspondent lender, as you have on here, actually underwrites the initial mortgage loan application and is running that through an automated underwriting engine and making an initial credit decision to their borrower prior to submitting it to the investor for their final approval. So again, the correspondent lender has more control in the process than a traditional mortgage broker does.
Right. And so as an NDC, then they're then sending it to the secondary market investor, such as FAM, who then goes on and underwrites the mortgage loan application and makes a credit decision, correct?
Yeah. When I said when they initially underwrite the file, is obviously a non-delegated correspondent. Hopefully, is going to be running their automated findings up front and evaluating whether they have a viable transaction prior to sending it to the investor. But yes, ultimately, we FAM as a secondary marketing investor, we actually could do make the complete credit decision on behalf of the borrower after validating the findings provided.
Right. And Garrett, we made this comparison chart, and we're not going to go through each line item, but you can pick up the slide deck and get a copy of this, because I think it really gives a good comparison of the differences. And so let's go through that, and I'm going to go through the slides, Garrett, just talking about the first difference, and that is origination. Is there a difference between origination as far as being a broker or a non-delegated correspondent?
In my opinion, there's not. The non-delegated correspondent originates the loan in the exact same manner as a wholesale transaction.
Okay. So how about disclosures?
Big difference.
Okay.
Again, the timing, they still have to, we're all responsible for federal compliance.
Right.
But the non-delegated correspondent is able to send that LE in their name immediately. They can immediately get an intent to proceed executed, and then that allows them to immediately order an appraisal. So on a purchase transaction, in my opinion, that gives significant leverage to getting their deals closed faster.
Makes sense. So let's talk about compensation and disclosure of compensation. What's the difference there?
Well, as a mortgage broker, every wholesale broker has a compensation plan directly with the lender, or of course their borrower pay. But most of the time it's going to be a compensation plan directly with the lender. So it's a one size fits all in terms of the way the compensation plan fits. Once they've made a compensation, that most lenders allow them to change it quarterly, but they're bound by that compensation plan for every loan submitted to the investor. And as a non-delegated correspondent, there is no compensation plan directly with us as a lender. So they have the flexibility to charge whatever they choose on each individual loan transaction. And again, that gives flexibility to put more deals together than a traditional wholesale broker, in my opinion.
Okay, and you talked about at the beginning and under control, and one of those is being able to have control over AMC. So can you talk some more about that and what they need in order to be able to do that?
Finance of America is going to require that every non-delegated correspondent have internal error policies and procedures. I've seen them as short as 3 pages and as long as 20 something. But essentially, they're telling us that they are going to be error compliant in the appraisal process, which if they're using an error compliant AMC, they're error compliant. Okay. So if they could provide the error policies and procedures to us, we in turn will allow that non-delegated correspondent to use whichever error compliant AMC they choose. Again, whether it be a national, regional, or local company, it's up to them. As long as the AMC they're using is error compliant, they have the flexibility to order appraisals through the AMC that best meets their needs and service levels.
Perfect. And also having that option with FAM to still continue to use FAM's AMC option as well as an NDC, correct?
Yes. Yes. If they do business with Finance of America, we have, I don't know, golly, probably over 20 approved AMCs.
Right.
So if they chose, if it's easier for them and they're happy with one of the approved AMCs we've got, they certainly can place the order through our system. It would be prepared in their name. It still remains portable, but they have the flexibility of ordering that directly through us. And there are some efficiencies that's related to getting the UCDP findings into the files.
Right. So let's talk about that in submission. So is there a big difference as far as submitting a loan from being a broker as opposed to being an NDC?
Exactly the same in terms of the mythology of submitting the loan. They're submitting virtually the same material to us on a non-delegated loan as they would a wholesale transaction.
So nothing changes there. How about underwriting?
Underwriting works virtually the same as well. Again, the majority of our non-delegated correspondents are running DO or LP directly themselves. They're assigning those findings to us and then validating those findings in underwriting. So, I do think it is important to note that we have dedicated non-delegated correspondent underwriting, because there are some differences in terms of the underwriters understanding that there's not the exact same compliance standards in terms of some of the documentation that they look for.
Right.
And again, the non-delegated correspondent has the ability and the need that we do need to verify tax transcripts. They can order that directly through preferred vendors prior to approval, as opposed to having us do that if they so choose.
So again, having that opportunity of having control. How about terms?
Again, the non-delegated correspondent essentially becomes the lender. So their loans are originated, disclosed, funded, and sold by them directly. And that's what gives them some of the expansive opportunities in terms of disclosure, closing, appraisal, and compensation plan.
And that ties into the branding, which is truly one of the advantages too, is to be able to have everything disclosed in their name, funded in their name, originated in their name. So having that ability to truly brand themselves is a true advantage. And especially in the marketplace today, if you're working on a local level, that's huge, because people are looking to work on that local level, right?
Right, wrong, or indifferent. I see a lot of realtors, and obviously I live in Dallas-Fort Worth, and Texas has got a very robust non-delegated correspondent business model here. We've been doing it in Texas since we started in like 1999. And I see the real estate community will often ask, are you a lender, are you a direct lender, or are you a mortgage broker? And I'm not disparaging mortgage brokers in any way. There are many awesome mortgage brokers that are very successful. I applaud them. But in the marketplace, there are some people that feel more comfortable if someone has branded themselves as a direct lender.
Right. And truly, for those that are on the call with us today, Garrett, it's those that are looking at that as far as being able to maybe expand into becoming an NDC from being a broker, or, as I said, of being a branch manager maybe for an organization that they're saying, hey, I'd like to do this on my own. I'm ready to go back out, and perhaps, and I know I have many friends that have, gone it alone, not gone it alone. And so it's like, okay, education is power. So I think really having the education as far as what are the benefits, what are the risks, what is the process, and that's going to be our next webinar, Garrett, that we're doing next week is, okay, what are the steps you have to take to do this? But while we're building that, while you're thinking about that and going through that in your mind, saying, hey, I'm considering this and I want to know what are the risks, what are the advantages, let's revisit that and let's talk about it. We expanded on branding. So really it's establishing yourself as the lender, building your company brand, giving that control and things like that, which are so important. The control you talked about as well. So gaining that additional control, the AMC, as we know, it is, and I think it's improved a little bit now, but in certain states, I always say occasionally I live in Oregon, but in Oregon and Washington and states like Colorado, there's a shortage of appraisers, and so trying to have some control over that, it gives them that as truly one of the additional benefits, right?
Absolutely. That's probably one of the top features that our customers are looking for. And in terms of branding, I just want to reiterate, this is a very powerful recruiting tool to go after the top originators in the marketplace. Right. When you start talking to the very best originators, they're looking to go to work for a lender. because they know what the advantages are of being able to own that loan estimate and the closing disclosure. They know they can put more deals together and they have more flexibility, and it will help accommodate them. So, one of the biggest opportunities in terms of not only just branding yourself as a lender, but the ability to recruit the top talent in the marketplace, I think is critical to take into consideration.
Right, which goes into part of that servicing, because that's the other thing. Obviously, branding is important, timing is important, but being able to provide that not just good, but that exceptional customer service is so important. And the advantages of being a broker is you have wholesale lenders that are working to earn your business, and the same as being an NDC, as opposed to working for a retail branch where they are not competing for your business. It gives you an advantage in doing that and providing the service, right?
Yeah, the ability to order your closing documents directly, right, to control the closing disclosure, the closing documents, and the funding. I just don't think there's enough positive that can be said about this. I've been in the mortgage origination business since 1984. And during my tenure of that's coming up on 33 years, I have never had a phone call from a realtor that said, Garrett, you did such a great job processing and underwriting my loan that I understand the closing is delayed. I just never had that phone call.
Right. Yeah.
So, the ability to execute a timely closing and funding, especially in a purchase transaction, it's priceless.
Right. Now, you talked about recruiting, and obviously, if you are looking to expand your business, and that is important. I know I was recently, we were both recently at the Florida Association of Mortgage Professionals Conference, and an individual that I had met last year just became an NDC in Florida. And now the next year, he was actively recruiting LOs. And one of the benefits of going from broker to being an NDC is to be able to do that and have more control as far as compensation. So you talked a little bit about compensation and not having that broker comp agreement with the wholesale lender. So what additional things do you want to include as far as considering a compensation for an advantage?
Well, here's a real example, right? You've taken a loan application from a borrower, and you process the loan. You've submitted it to underwriting, and you get a call from that great 740 FICO score borrower that's putting 20% down, and he says, "I'm not willing. This is a little bit too expensive for me." Well, if you're on a lender paid comp model, there's nothing you can do. You've got a lender paid comp model, right? As a non-delegated correspondent, as you said here, it's based on rate and on each individual loan. They have the ability to immediately lower the compensation on that, or what they're willing to take on that particular loan, and the compensation to the loan officer is internally negotiated. So again, that's an example of the flexibility and control as a non-delegated correspondent to make a deal happen that could otherwise be a nightmare scenario. Another area that I don't know if it's in our deck and that we talked about that I see is on a wholesale transaction, if a broker inadvertently underdiscloses a fee, right, and they've got a lender paid comp model, well, the wholesale lender has to make a decision whether they're willing to absorb that, right. For the transaction to move forward. A non-delegated correspondent, so say you've got your best realtor on the other end of that transaction and the wholesaler is saying, no, we're not going to move forward. We're not willing to pay that. You got a big problem on your hands. As a non-delegated correspondent, right, you have the ability to say, hey, I'll absorb that. I'll take it out of the profit of the loan, consummate the transaction, move forward, satisfy the referral partner, and look like a hero. So that's just two real-life examples of the flexibility and how it can help you do more business.
Right, and we do have a slide on that, so I jumped ahead to show that, which ties into really the disclosures. To be able to act as the lender in the transaction, control the timing of disclosures, control those fees, which again goes back to the one thing. I mean, the number one benefit truly is control, and then number two would be branding and growth. So, if you're considering that this is a business model to get into, then those are the things to look at, right?
Absolutely.
Okay, and then let's talk about volume because, you know, again, this is an opportunity if you're looking to expand into a business to grow your volume, grow your team, take a team that you may have with you. These are some of the things that we're seeing in the industry. Increasing the volume is something to really consider, right?
Absolutely. Again, we've talked about the many benefits of controlling the loan estimate and the fees, and the ability and the ramifications of not having a compensation plan directly with the lender and having it internally. It affords the customers the ability to bring in deals that are more difficult to bring in today, attracts top talent, and grow their business significantly and faster than a traditional mortgage broker, in my opinion.
Right. So let's talk about some FAQs. And if you're having questions, I'm seeing a few of them come in, so let us know. But I'm going to go through some of these because I think some of these are the ones that we are seeing here. So we're going to start out with the first one. And Garrett, I'm just going to tee this up to you. So as an NDC lender, will I need a lot more support staff?
Emphatically no. Again, if they use what I term the variable cost outsource solution, meaning they can go to a third-party fulfillment provider, which we can make recommendations. They can pass that through loan by loan. They don't need to add any full-time employees to make this business model work.
So really just existing as they are today, then they can go ahead and get started as an NDC. And we're going to go through how to get started in our next webinar will be coming up next week. And I'm going to give you some login information as far as how you can get registered for that. But I want to go to the next question. And this is one that I'm seeing here as well. I still get paid at closing, right?
Again, the timing of the compensation changes for a non-delegated correspondent. Because the warehouse banks net fund the transaction, there is no money that changes hands to the lender at the actual closing table. They get paid at loan purchase. So at Finance of America, we're buying loans in about typically 3 to 4 days, business days. So they would typically get paid once they've shipped the transaction to us. Call it about a week or so after the actual closing takes place is when the loan is purchased, and they would get paid.
So pretty much the same, little bit of additional timeline at the end. And that's why it's so important, Garrett, to be able to work with a lender, wholesale lender like Finance of America, that does such a great job as far as doing that review and getting those loans purchased off of their line.
Absolutely. I like to say Finance of America is the direct communication lender. Our customers have direct access to talk to underwriters. They have and the same goes for our purchase team. They can speak directly to our purchase team, and the same person that initially reviews it is going to be the one that clears their conditions. And so, I like to say we have one of the best purchase teams in the industry, and we do a phenomenal job of getting those purchased in a very timely manner.
Right. Well, and I know you have a saying at Finance of America, it's customers first, last, and always. And I think that's so important in today's market.
That's the number one reason that I love Finance of America. Everybody's on the same page, and the absolute truth is that our paychecks say Finance of America, but our employers are the customers that send us loans.
I like that. It's so true. So one of the last questions I'm going to ask you, and then we're going to go ahead and turn it over. If you have any additional questions, please feel free to ask those in there and type them in your question box while I see you're doing. So I'll key those up, Garrett, in just a second. But why would an investor ask me to buy back a loan?
The only time I've ever seen it would be fraud and misrepresentation, and that's very rare. I mean, today, obviously, as technology is so vastly improved, our underwriters are able to catch most of virtually all of the situations that could cause that in advance. But again, it would be fraud or misrepresentation.
Right. So we have a question that's being asked, Garrett, and so he's talking about compensation as far as varying per transaction. And so obviously we know with LO compensation must be based solely on the term of the loan. And so I think he's referencing in terms of if there's a tolerance issue. And he wants to know as far as what the CFPB thinks of that, as far as compensation varying on per transaction.
Well, remember that on a non-delegated correspondent loan, because it's independently funded from a warehouse line, it gets what's called the secondary market exemption, right? Because theoretically, they can wait until the last minute to sell that loan. And so obviously there would be varying, the possibility, the high probability exists of different pricing at loan sale than what was initially done. So the CFPB recognizes that a non-delegated correspondent has moved into that secondary marketing exemption category and has more flexibility. In terms of what I meant by the ability to price individually is more along the lines of because a non-delegated correspondent doesn't have a set compensation plan in terms of lender paid comp on a transaction, they have the ability to negotiate a price individually with that borrower to consummate the transaction.
Right, and you still have your LO comp agreements with your LOs.
Yeah, the LO has to be paid. Yeah, the LO has to be paid on that transaction per the comp plan. That doesn't vary.
Exactly. And so those kind of things too, if you're having great questions and very real questions, and especially when you're looking at that as far as what the CFPB approves of, you need to look at fair lending because that's obviously important. But just having that ability to say, to lower a fee, and especially in lowering a fee, as a broker, if something is disclosed incorrectly and it's at a tolerance, then, can you have that ability? Because as a broker, and you may have, a lender that will lower a little bit, but not very much. So those are the kind of things to consider.
So, Ginger, let me add in there that in no way, shape, or form are we trying to circumvent the CFPB's LO compensation rules.
Right.
That's not, or the compensation rules in general. That's not what we're saying. What we're saying is an NDC lender, because they're not bound by a compensation plan with that lender, has more flexibility on an individual transaction to price the loan where the borrower is satisfied, it meets the requirements, and they can do more transactions.
Yeah, and you still need to have your LO comp agreements. You still need to look at your fair lending. Those kind of things are all things that are very much, you still have to meet those requirements. So we have another question in, Garrett, talking about, can you explain SRP?
Sure, I can explain that. So in the old broker world, when you had above par pricing, it was called YSP, or yield spread premium, right? And today, of course, within the advent of lender paid compensation, that is priced as part of the lender paid compensation. And then if there's any additional, it has to go directly as a borrower concession. When you move to a non-delegated correspondent, above par pricing, the old yield spread premium essentially becomes serviced release premium. And because that is paid at loan purchase, not at the closing table, it does not have to be disclosed to the borrower, and you have additional flexibility in terms of the pricing.
So it takes it out of upfront and puts it onto the back end when the loan is purchased, because it's after the actual funding of the transaction.
And hence the term secondary marketing transaction.
Exactly.
And why that's able to happen.
Right. So next question, for a broker considering becoming an NDC, what kind of volume should a broker office be producing before deciding to become an NDC?
I've seen customers as small as $2 million in net worth $2 million a month in volume make the transition. Normally 3 to 5 million is the sweet spot. But it can be done with lower volumes. Obviously, you want to be able to have enough volume where you can commit yourself to the business channel and to an investor partner and have it make sense.
Right. And a lot of those things, too, we will be discussing in our next webinar, which will be next week. And so, for the sake of time, and you guys, I want to thank you all for staying on the call. We have gone over a little bit by 45 minutes that I like to stick with, and I know you all are busy. And so, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put Garrett's information up on the screen so you can contact Garrett directly if you have any additional questions. So please do that. And again, if you would like a copy of the slide deck that has all this information in there, you just click on the link that's in your chat panel, and that'll open it up into the URL that I put up there, and then you can just save it on your computer, print it off, whatever you would like. So our next webinar, and what we've done is we've just divided this into steps. So the first one, okay, here are some of the benefits, here's the things to consider, but what are the steps you need to take to become a non-delegated correspondent? And so next Thursday, September 21st, same time, we will have a webinar that Garrett and I will be on, and we'll go through the steps that you need to take. So things like the question, you know, what kind of volume should I be at? What do I need for my net worth? How long does it have to be seasoned? You know, those are the kind of things to think about. I was talking to somebody who was in Atlanta a couple months ago at a show I was at, and he was looking at saving up money to be able to have his net worth to be able to becoming an NDC. So those are the kind of things to think about. We will talk about that. The link is here. I will send up a follow-up to all of you that are on this call so you can register early if you would like to do that. And I want to thank everyone for being in the call, and I want to thank Garrett so much for your expertise. You know, it's amazing, Garrett. I've had the opportunity to work with you for a while now, and I still learn things every time I hop on a call with you or do a video or have a conversation. So I want to thank you so much for that expertise. Guys, if you are not registered for NAM National, it's coming up in October in Vegas. Great time to be in Vegas, not too hot, not too cold. And so if you are not a member of NAM, consider joining. If you are not going to NAM National, I would really recommend it. It's a great opportunity for you to be able to learn, to grow, and we're actually doing a panel there, which we're calling BYOB, Build Your Own Business, and we'll have some experts there talking about becoming NDC or a broker. So again, thank you so much. You guys have a great week, and we look forward to seeing you on the next call. Thank you, Garrett.
Thanks, Ginger. Bye-bye.